Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about what may end up being the ultimate Nintendo Switch 2 graphical and technical showcase in this year of 2025, Luigi's Mansion 4. This is a theory. It is not yet confirmed if this game will be announced to be coming this year, but it's a theory that seems to be gaining more and more steam. More and more people are starting to believe that this may be the big game Nintendo will announce in the next big direct, presumably this June. Which, by the way, by that point, it will be past the June 5th, the launch of Switch 2, when I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers. So, if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. But yes, I'm starting to see more and more people buy into this theory that Luigi's Mansion 4 is going to be the big holiday game this year that will showcase a lot of what the Switch 2 can do, and it will really help to sell people on just how unique and amazing this console is. And so today the plan is to recap the theory, provide a little bit more reason as to why it makes sense to be happening this year, and then go into detail on how Luigi's Mansion 4 can fully showcase the console and just how amazing this game may end up being. And here I am jumping on camera to talk to you about the Switch 2 TomToc carrying cases. They come in a few different colors, as I just showed a few right there. I actually also have a black one over here, and they feel really great, super high quality, nice little handle here. But I also have this TomToc sling bag as well that can also house a Nintendo Switch 2. It works pretty great. So if you're curious about these carrying cases, check the link in the description below, and also use my code NEWGEAR15 to save 15% off. So on April 12th, I published a video about a rumor that has gone out there about there being one more big surprise title from Nintendo for Switch 2 in this year of 2025. And in there, I ultimately theorized that Luigi's Mansion 4 might just be the best fit. But I don't even think you really need to consider any rumors here for this to make a lot of sense. Just consider the lineup of games we know so far for Switch 2. There likely still needs to be one more big exclusive Switch 2 title from Nintendo for this year. Mario Kart World's in June, Donkey Kong Bonanza's in July, and then after that we know about Dragon Drive, but that's a digital-only title. There are some Switch 2 Edition games coming out, like Kirby and the Forgotten Land, but that's coming out in August, and like Mario Party Jamboree in July, there will likely be another game that comes out in August alongside this Kirby Switch 2 edition. But then beyond that, we also have Pokemon Legends EA and Metroid Prime 4, which are brand new titles that are coming out for Switch 1 and also have Switch 2 editions, which certainly will be big deals. But they are not exclusive Switch 2 titles coming out during the holiday season. Nintendo will likely need at least one more big exclusive title. Now you may want to consider Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, you may also want to consider Kirby Air Riders, but Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment isn't even guaranteed to be coming out this year, it just has a winter timing. It is a spin-off Zelda title. And then Kirby Air Riders, while cool, is also fairly niche. And so my point is here, Nintendo most likely will have at least one more big Nintendo-published Switch 2 exclusive that has a lot of sales potential. And many people would have assumed that would have been 3D Mario. It makes a lot of sense for 3D Mario to come out for the holiday, because historically speaking, 3D Mario is always available early on for any new Nintendo generation. This upcoming September will also be the 40th anniversary for the Super Mario Bros. Series, and every 5 years Nintendo does do some sort of major celebration for Mario in this way, where there are different games coming out and such. And then we also have the big Mario movie coming out next April. So it makes sense to have a variety of Mario offerings to close this year and in early next year as well, and perhaps 3D Mario may play a role here. However, we're also getting Donkey Kong Bonanza, a 3D platformer, this July, which seems to have been worked on by at least part of the 3D Mario team. And we've had rumors about the 3D Mario team working on this game since like 2018, so it seems that these rumors are correct. And even if they're not correct, you might want to think that Nintendo would want to space out major 3D platformers. This is a possibility, maybe 3D Mario's not coming out until next year. And so what kind of game could Nintendo put out that would make sense alongside Mario's 40th anniversary, that will be building things up, and that would also have a lot of sales potential? Well, Luigi's Mansion 4 is one of the few games that would make a lot of sense here, because yes, Luigi is part of the expanded Mario universe, and also Luigi's Mansion 3 is one of the best-selling games on Nintendo Switch. It sold 14.25 million copies, which is very impressive, and we take a look at the kind of games that outsold Luigi's Mansion. Well, for the most part, it's either Pokemon games, a major 3D Zelda game, Animal Crossing, Smash Bros., or a 3D Mario title. Given that Sakurai is working on Kirby Air Riders this year, Smash seems unlikely. Animal Crossing usually doesn't come out in the first year of a new console. We just talked about how we may have to wait a little bit later for 3D Mario, and it's too soon for the next 3D Zelda. So with this in mind, Nintendo's best bet to have a big seller this holiday might just be Luigi's Mansion. But also, the developer of Luigi's Mansion 3 and also Dark Moon, Luigi's Mansion 2 on 3DS, is due for their next game. They come out with a game every 3 years. And they've been doing this for the last couple generations consistently. Even when they jumped over from 3DS to Switch and they had a significant leap in hardware abilities, more so than what we're seeing from Switch to Switch 2, they still maintained this 3-year pattern. And Luigi's Mansion 3 is their best-selling game, and Mario Strikers Battle League, which came out in 2022, was seemingly kind of light, perhaps suggesting they've been putting more time and resources into their next big game, which may be a Year 1 launch title for Switch 2. It might just be a follow-up to their most successful game ever, Luigi's Mansion 3, so Luigi's Mansion 4 makes a lot of sense for this reason. But there are perhaps other signs suggesting that Luigi's Mansion 4 may be part of the plan here early on. So firstly, last year Nintendo put out Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. And at first glance this may not seem like that big of a deal, but this could be a similar situation to what happened back in 2018. In 2018, Nintendo put out a remake on 3DS for Luigi's Mansion, the original. And then a year later in 2019, we got Luigi's Mansion 3. So it might be that history is repeating itself here, and Luigi's Mansion 2 HD might be a precursor to Luigi's Mansion 4 on Switch 2 in 2025. And I actually think there may be a double reasoning to this. So firstly, you take a look at situations like how we got Pikmin 3 Deluxe before Pikmin 4, or we take a look at how we got Skyward Sword HD before Tears of the Kingdom, or another example, most recently, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD before Donkey Kong Bonanza. There's a little bit of a history of Nintendo putting out remasters or remakes of a particular series before we get the next one. It's kind of meant as a bit of a primer. It helps to engage the fan base and build up a little bit of a momentum before the next big release. But the other reasoning here is to put out a game for a series on the prior platform so fans that have not yet moved on can have that in the meanwhile. So for those who aren't ready to move on to Switch, they got the Luigi's Mansion remake. For those not ready to move on to Switch 2 and Donkey Kong Bonanza, they have Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. And then for those who are also not going to be ready for Luigi's Mansion 4 on Switch 2, they will have Luigi's Mansion 2 HD from last year. But there's another little thing that's popped up that I find to be rather interesting. Nintendo's already confirmed that Luigi's Mansion is going to be one of the first games added to Nintendo GameCube for Switch Online. So all of a sudden we're going to be in a scenario where both Luigi's Mansion 2, 1, and 3 will all be readily available for Switch 2 owners, perhaps right before the release of Luigi's Mansion 4, which may end up being in the spooky month of the year, this October. A lot of things seem to be aligning here. The release for Luigi's Mansion 1, Dark Moon having just come out last year, the pattern of next level game releases lining up with this year as well, and Nintendo likely needing another big seller, and the only major IP that seems to make sense to come out for this holiday outside of 3D Mario if it's not ready would be Luigi's Mansion. But Luigi's Mansion 4 might actually end up being the ideal game to showcase the Nintendo Switch 2 when you really start to think about it here. So for the most part, Luigi's Mansion gameplay is you exploring one box of a room at a time. And these boxes of rooms that you explore, there's a great deal of density and detail to these small environments. And historically speaking, Luigi's Mansion games have always been looked at as one of the more visually impressive games for their respective consoles. Luigi's Mansion 1 was a real showcase of Nintendo GameCube back in the day. Luigi's Mansion 2 Dark Moon, even though it may be the lesser liked of the three games, is still a fairly visually impressive game for Nintendo 3DS. And Luigi's Mansion 3 is almost inarguably a top 10 best looking game on Switch 1, maybe top 5 if not higher. It's an incredible looking game with a great level of detail that perhaps many were not expecting. It's not just the amount of objects in detail within these small rooms, but the level of interactivity. You can move around so many different things with your poltergust sucking things up and all the air causing all of this movement, and then cash and coins falling all around. Almost every item in these rooms is interactive. And this is all possible because they are focusing on a small space. It's somewhat similar to the Metroid Prime situation, where Retro Studios focuses on these smaller environments with small corridors, so they're able to put in a lot more detail than you might see in something like, say for example, Breath of the Wild, that's far more open. It's a similar approach, if not even more so, in the direction of focusing on a smaller environment. But with this focus on this great level of detail within these small spaces, there are all these small little items and trinkets all throughout. And I think one of the obvious advantages of putting out a Luigi's Mansion 4 on Switch 2 is the resolution boost. Being able to put out a game at a 4K resolution. With a higher resolution, all those small little details become all the more clear. But something else that would benefit the Luigi's Mansion series on Switch 2 is an improved frame rate, as it would for many games. But when you consider that you do aim around with your poltergust in Luigi's Mansion games, and also with Luigi's Mansion 3 specifically, they added in even more action elements with the slam and burst mechanics, there is more reason to have a smoother, improved frame rate. And as we've seen with most Nintendo-published Switch 2 titles, the focus is on having at least 60 frames per second. Switch 2 is capable of running games at 120 frames per second. So I would imagine that with Luigi's Mansion 4, we'd be looking at another 4K 60 FPS game, which would be very feasible considering that Luigi's Mansion gameplay is focused on these smaller environments. But the Switch 2 can also offer various ways to improve the gameplay of the Luigi's Mansion series. So Luigi does aim around quite a bit with his poltergust, and so one obvious inclusion would be mouse controls. As we've heard from the different impressions of mouse controls of different games, including Metroid Prime 4, that increased level of speed and precision changes the experience. And I've always felt with the Luigi's Mansion games, aiming around has been a little slow and awkward. So by introducing mouse controls, they can really improve the flow of the game, especially with an improved frame rate. But also the thing about Luigi's Mansion games, a lot of it is about feeling around the environment, looking for clues. And something they can introduce to improve that experience is HD Rumble 2. Nintendo's gone ahead and improved the HD Rumble, and so there can be even more tactile feedback to give us an even better understanding of our environment on Switch 2 with Luigi's Mansion 4. But I want to go a step further here, because I actually think there's a direction they can take the Luigi's Mansion series that would make it even better. So I'd like to point out as an example what Nintendo did with Pikmin 4. They brought in the camera closer. It made the gameplay feel all the more engaging. They made it feel a little bit more like an action-adventure game, which I think ultimately improved the overall flow and gameplay loop for the Pikmin series. It still retained what made Pikmin so great, but by bringing in the camera closer, introducing Ochi, I think they made the game more inviting for a larger audience. And Luigi's Mansion is already a big seller, so I'm not saying they need to find ways to make Luigi's Mansion an even bigger seller, although I'm sure that's always a consideration. But something they can do that I think would be really neat is if they brought the camera in closer. And so you might be wondering, what are you getting at here? Are you talking about a first-person Luigi's Mansion game? I think that would be a neat idea. If I'm not mistaken, there is an arcade version of Luigi's Mansion that is in first-person, but that's not so much what I'm getting at here, although maybe it might be a little bit of a happy middle ground. Perhaps something like what we've seen in Resident Evil, over-the-shoulder gameplay. You still, for the most part, see the entire environment, but the camera's brought even closer to Luigi. It's over his shoulder, and you aim around in third person. But I'm not trying to argue they should make Luigi's Mansion 4 like an intense shooter. It can still overall maintain the same level of pace, but by going in this direction, what you do is you make it easier to look and aim around, then also, because the camera's brought in closer, especially when you also account for the improved resolution, we can get a better sense of the environment around us and see things in closer detail. Now, something interesting about going in this direction, there's something else they can do that would be interesting. So Luigi's Mansion 3 had a focus on cooperative play, which I enjoyed, but both characters would have to stick to one room. With Switch 2 and the improved capabilities of the console, they might not have that limitation. Imagine a scenario where you have split-screen gameplay in Luigi's Mansion 4. Imagine it's somewhat like what we've seen with Mario Kart World, where you have split-screen just for 2 players, and you're racing around these vast environments at a high resolution and still at a smooth 60 frames per second. So, considering what they can do with Mario Kart World, in these scaled down, more detailed environments, I think they can still maintain that same level of high resolution and performance. But also from a gameplay perspective, this gives us a lot more options, because in cooperative play, you won't be locked between one room, but you can have each other exploring different rooms. And so there can be a lot more puzzles where you're working with your teammate that span more than one room at a time. And I'll also speak to another feature of Switch 2 that we didn't have access to on Switch 1, and that is game chat. Not only could this work for local play, but also online play, where you would still have one full screen for yourself, but you can engage in cooperative play online. But still maybe even introduce that camera feature where you have a look at your face. Nintendo Next Level Games may want to do this here, but because it's Luigi's Mansion where it can be spooky and there may be the occasional jump scare, it might be neat to be playing with your friend and see them getting spooked or scared at something that jumps out at you throughout the gameplay of Luigi's Mansion 4. And as they've done with prior Luigi's Mansion games, I'm sure they can also have some sort of alternate mode where you have multiplayer for 4 or even 8 players that also integrates game chat, and it's a fun, silly, but spooky experience. I think there is so much potential for this kind of game, and if it does indeed come out this year, it would be something very different from everything else that's coming out. It would offer more variety and really help to round out the lineup that Nintendo has to offer for Switch 2. But what do you all think? What do you make of the likelihood of Luigi's Mansion 4 being the big surprise for this year? And what do you make of it being a big showcase for what the Switch 2 can do? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.